My family stopped talking to me when I married and got pregnant by a black man. 7 years of silence. But when his company grew to $55 million, they showed up at our door. My answer they will never forget. Good day, dear listeners. It's Maria again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And also, let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. There are moments in your life that divide everything into before and after. Mine came on a Thursday morning in October, when I opened my front door and found my mother standing on my porch. The same porch she had never once set foot on in 7 years. But let me start from the beginning, because the ending means nothing without it. My name is Lauren Carter. I grew up Lauren Lancaster in Marietta, Georgia, the middle daughter of Carol and Douglas Lancaster. My father was a retired civil engineer. My mother ran a small catering business out of our kitchen for most of my childhood. We were a church-going family, a BBQ on Sundays family, a wave at your neighbor's family. On the surface, we looked like the kind of people who had no business being cruel. I met Marcus at a conference in Atlanta in the spring of 2014. He was 31, I was 28. He had the kind of laugh that made everyone in a room feel included. Warm, unhurried, real. He was presenting a paper on supply chain logistics, and I was there representing the marketing firm I worked for at the time. We talked for 3 hours in the hotel lobby after the sessions ended. He walked me to my car. He called me the next morning. By the end of that year, I knew I was going to marry him. I also knew my family would have something to say about it. Marcus is black. I am white. In 2014, in Marietta, Georgia, in my family, that was not a small detail. I told myself I was overthinking it. My parents had always said they raised us to treat people equally. My sister Diane had always called herself progressive. My younger brother Tyler had black friends growing up. I told myself those things like a prayer. The first warning came at Thanksgiving that year. I brought Marcus to dinner for the first time. My mother smiled too hard and talked too fast. My father shook Marcus's hand exactly once and did not speak to him again for the rest of the evening. Diane pulled me into the kitchen under the pretense of helping with dishes and said quietly, with a smile still on her face, "Is this serious, Lauren? Because you need to think about what you're doing." I asked her what she meant. She didn't answer. She handed me a dish towel and walked back into the dining room. I noticed things after that, small things at first. My parents stopped asking about Marcus by name. They would say, "your friend," or "your situation," or simply nothing at all. When Marcus and I got engaged in the spring of 2015, my mother cried, but not the way mothers cry at good news. She sat at her kitchen table and wept into her hands, while my father stood in the doorway with his arms folded, silent as stone. My father said, "I hope you know what you're choosing." He meant it as a warning. I took it as a goodbye. We got married in July 2015. A small ceremony at a botanical garden outside Atlanta. Marcus's family filled one side of the venue. His mother Renata, his 2 brothers, his aunts and cousins, people who hugged me and called me baby and danced barefoot on the grass after the reception. My side of the aisle held 3 people, my college roommate Priya, my coworker Janet, and an elderly neighbor named Mrs. Albright who had always liked me. My parents did not come. Diane did not come. Tyler did not come. No call, no card, no explanation. I cried in the car on the way to our honeymoon hotel. Marcus held my hand and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. I had made my choice. So had they. 6 weeks after our wedding, I found out I was pregnant. I sent my mother a text, a single sentence. "Mom, I'm pregnant. I wanted you to know." She did not reply for 11 days. When she finally did, it was 4 words: "I'll pray for you." That was the last communication I had with my family for 7 years. 7 years. 2,555 days, give or take. In that time, Marcus built his logistics consulting firm from a 2-person startup in our spare bedroom to a company with 43 employees and contracts across 11 states. Our daughter Zoe was born in March 2016. She learned to walk in that spare bedroom. She started kindergarten in a school Marcus and I chose together. She said her first word, light, pointing at a lamp one evening while Marcus was working late. I was the only one there to hear it. My family missed all of it. And then, on a Thursday morning in October 2022, I opened my front door and found my mother standing on my porch. She was wearing her church clothes, navy blue dress, low heels, pearl earrings. She looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I had grown. Behind her, parked at the curb, I could see my father in the passenger seat of a silver SUV I didn't recognize. Diane was at the wheel. My mother smiled. It was the same smile she had given Marcus at Thanksgiving 8 years ago. Too wide, too careful. "Lauren," she said, "can we come in?" I stood in the doorway and said nothing for what felt like a very long time. I thought about Zoe's first word. I thought about the 4 words my mother had sent after I told her I was pregnant. I thought about the empty seats on my side of the aisle, and I thought about what Marcus had told me the week before, that Carter Logistics Solutions had just closed a deal that put the company's valuation at $55 million. The news had run in a local business journal. My father subscribed to that journal. He had subscribed to it for 30 years. "Lauren," my mother said again. Her voice had a softness in it that I recognized. It was the voice she used when she wanted something. I looked at her for one more long moment. Then I stepped back and held the door open. I let them in, but I was already thinking. I led them into the living room and I did not offer coffee. That was the first deliberate decision I made. A small one, but conscious. A cup of coffee says welcome. It says sit down, stay a while. We can talk about this. I was not ready to say any of those things, and I was not sure I ever would be. My mother and father sat on the sofa. Diane took the armchair by the window. She looked around the room the way people do when they're trying to assess your life. Eyes moving across the bookshelves, the framed photos, the art Marcus had chosen on a trip to New Orleans 2 years ago. She landed on the photo of Zoe from last Easter, and something shifted in her expression. I couldn't tell if it was regret or calculation. I still can't. "You have a beautiful home," my mother said. "Thank you," I said. I sat across from them in the other armchair. I kept my hands in my lap and I kept my face neutral. Marcus was at the office. Zoe was at school. I was grateful for both of those facts. My father cleared his throat. He was a man who had always used silence as a weapon, and I recognized the pause he was building. "We've been thinking," he said, "that it's been too long, that family is family. Family is family. 7 years ago, that principle had apparently had exceptions." "I agree," I said. "It has been a long time." There was an awkward silence. My mother filled it. She talked about her health, a knee surgery she'd had the previous spring. She talked about Tyler, who had moved to Nashville and was working in real estate. She talked about Diane's daughter, Abby, who was 9 now. She talked about everything except the 7 years of silence, and everything except why they were sitting in my living room right now, and everything except what they actually wanted. I listened. I nodded. I watched. When they left 40 minutes later, my mother hugged me at the door. Her perfume was the same, Chanel No. 5, the same bottle shape she'd kept on her vanity my whole life. The familiarity of it hit me somewhere deep and involuntary, the way your body sometimes betrays your mind. I felt a pull toward her. Grief, maybe, or the ghost of it. But I also noticed, as she hugged me, that she had said nothing, not one word, about Marcus. Not his name, not his company, not her son-in-law who had built something remarkable from nothing, not a single acknowledgement that he existed. I closed the door and stood in my hallway for a long time. Then I walked to the kitchen table, sat down, and made a list. Not a dramatic list, not a revenge fantasy, a real list, the kind I make when I need to think clearly. On one side, I wrote what I knew. On the other, what I needed to find out. What I knew. My family had cut me off completely in 2015. No contact for 7 years. The week before they showed up, Marcus's company valuation had been published in a business journal my father read. They had come with no warning, no apology, and no explanation. My mother had not mentioned Marcus once. What I needed to find out, what did they actually want? What were they planning to ask for? And the question that kept rising to the surface, how far were they willing to go to get it? Because here was what I understood, sitting at my kitchen table in the quiet of that October morning. People who cut off their daughter for marrying the wrong man do not drive 3 hours across Georgia and show up in church clothes because they've had a change of heart. They come because something has changed in their circumstances, not in their values. The $55 million valuation had changed something. That much was certain. The question was what they intended to do with that information. Over the next 3 days, I did what I always did when I was frightened and needed to think straight. I moved slowly and I moved carefully. I did not call my mother back, though she left 2 messages. Warm messages, full of phrases like just checking in and hope Zoe is doing well, the kind of language that assumed a warmth that had not yet been earned. I called my friend Priya instead. Priya had been a witness at my wedding. She had a law degree she'd never fully used, and the sharpest instincts of anyone I knew. I told her everything. The visit, the timing, the silence about Marcus. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Lauren, how much of your household finances are in shared accounts?" That question told me everything I needed to know about what I had to do next. Marcus and I talked that night after Zoe was in bed. I told him about the visit. I watched his face as I described it. The careful smile, the small talk, the complete absence of his name in any sentence my mother spoke. His jaw tightened once. Just once. Then it relaxed. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I want to protect us," I said. "I want to understand what they're after before they get close enough to do any damage." He nodded slowly. "Then let's understand it." That was when the plan began. Not as anger, not as revenge, but as something quieter and more durable. Preparation. I was going to find out exactly what my family wanted, document every step of it, and make sure that when the moment came, I was the one holding the evidence. I opened my laptop. I started with my father's business background because that was where I knew he thought he was smart. And people who think they're smart always leave a trail. Priya knew an attorney. His name was David Okafor, mid-40s, family law and estate planning, a small firm in Buckhead with a reputation for being thorough and discreet. She'd gone to law school with him and trusted him completely. I made an appointment for the following Tuesday and told no one except Marcus. The meeting lasted 2 hours. David Okafor was the kind of lawyer who listened more than he talked. He let me lay out everything: the 7-year estrangement, the timing of the visit, my father's financial background, the business journal article. He took careful notes by hand in a yellow legal pad, and he only interrupted twice to ask clarifying questions. When I was done, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Mrs. Carter, there's nothing here that's illegal yet, but the pattern you're describing is consistent with something I see fairly regularly. Family members who become interested in a spouse's assets, sometimes through direct pressure, sometimes through legal mechanisms, sometimes through emotional leverage." "What kind of legal mechanisms?" I asked. He outlined several possibilities: disputed loans or informal gifts from the past that could be recharacterized, claims of unjust enrichment, challenges based on past promises, real or invented, and, in cases involving estranged family members, occasional attempts to work through a vulnerable spouse rather than confronting the wealthier one directly. That last point sat with me. I asked him what I should do. He said, "Document everything. Every visit, every phone call, every message. Note the exact words used, the time, the context. Open no joint ventures, sign no agreements, make no promises, and above all, do not let them into your financial picture voluntarily." I drove home from that meeting with a yellow legal pad of my own and a voice memo app activated on my phone. I also made one more decision in that car. I was going to set a careful, controlled trap, not to harm them, to learn. If their intentions were what I suspected, I needed them to reveal those intentions clearly enough that I could act on the evidence. That meant keeping the door open, just barely, just enough. I called my mother back that evening. I kept my voice warm and non-committal. She was delighted to hear from me. She suggested lunch the following week, just the two of us. I agreed. We met at a restaurant in Marietta, the kind of place with white tablecloths and a parking lot full of church ladies. My mother arrived 10 minutes late and apologized beautifully. She looked rested. She had her Chanel No. 5 on again. We ordered salads, and she told me about Tyler's new condo in Nashville and Diane's landscaping project, and her knee, which was much better now, thank you for asking. I waited. I watched. I let the silence do its work. It came over the dessert menu. She set hers down and looked at me with what I can only describe as a prepared expression, something she had rehearsed or at least thought about in advance. "Lauren," she said, "your father and I have been talking. We know things were difficult, and we want to do better. We want to be part of your life, and of Marcus's." She said his name. First time. "We'd love to have you all to the house," she continued, "and we thought maybe, since Marcus has done so well, and since your father knows the business world, that there might be a way for us to be helpful to each other, going forward." Helpful to each other. There it was. I kept my face open and interested. "What do you mean by helpful?" I asked. She was vague. She talked about my father's network, his connections, how he still knew people in infrastructure, how sometimes in business it was less about the idea and more about who you knew. She made it sound casual, just a thought, just an offer. I smiled and said that sounded very interesting, and I would mention it to Marcus. On the drive home, I played back the voice memo, listened to every word. Then I called Priya. "They want in," I said. "You have it recorded?" "Clearly." "Save it to 3 separate places tonight," she said. "Cloud, external drive, and email it to me." I did all 3 before I went to bed. The first direct proof had landed in my lap over a Caesar salad and unsolicited family warmth. My mother had walked into that restaurant believing she was setting the terms. She left without knowing she had handed me exactly what I needed. 2 days later, I found something that changed the shape of everything. I had been quietly tracing my father's business history. Publicly available records, state filings, anything accessible without a subpoena. He had retired from engineering, yes, But in the 4 years before his retirement, he had been named in 2 civil disputes involving contract claims. Both had been settled quietly. I pulled the public filings. In one of them, the opposing party's attorney had filed a brief describing my father as someone with and I quote from the legal document, demonstrated pattern of recharacterizing informal agreements as binding financial obligations after the fact. I read that sentence 4 times. I printed the filing. I put it in the folder I had started, the one I kept in the file cabinet in Marcus's home office, behind our mortgage papers. I labeled the folder with a single word I could explain to anyone as innocuous: correspondence. That night, I told Marcus what I had found. He sat with it for a long moment. Then he said, "Lauren, call David Okafor tomorrow, not just for advice. I want him formally retained." We were no longer gathering information. We were building a case. And somewhere across town, I felt it, the way you feel a change in the weather before the rain. My family was beginning to sense that the door they thought they had nudged open might be something more complicated than they had planned for. David Okafor was officially our attorney of record by the following Friday. He advised us on our next step with the precision of someone who had seen this specific kind of situation before, dressed in 100 different family costumes. "Don't confront them yet," he said. "Let them show you more of the plan first. The more they volunteer, the cleaner your position becomes." So I continued to return my mother's calls. I had a second lunch with her in November. Marcus had a brief, carefully arranged dinner with my parents and Diane at a steakhouse in Buckhead, the kind of restaurant my father had chosen deliberately, the kind with heavy menus and heavier checks, a setting he clearly believed would put him on familiar ground. Marcus wore a simple suit and ordered water and said almost nothing. He listened the way he had always listened, completely, without telegraphing what he understood. Afterward in the car, he told me that my father had spent the majority of the dinner talking about a consulting opportunity he believed Carter Logistics Solutions should explore, one that would, conveniently, involve a small ownership stake granted to a silent partner who brought regional knowledge. That silent partner was, of course, my father. Marcus had smiled and said he'd give it serious thought. He had said nothing else. David Okafor's response when we reported this was to have his paralegal begin drafting a formal cease and desist. Not for use yet, but ready, like a document loaded and waiting in a drawer. The moment things shifted came on a Saturday morning in late November. I was in the kitchen with Zoe. She was 6, building something complicated and uncertain out of blocks on the floor. When my phone rang, it was Diane. Not my mother, Diane. Her voice was different from our mother's, harder. Diane had never been the soft one. "Lauren," she said without any preamble, "I need you to understand something. Dad isn't well. He hasn't told Mom the full extent of it yet, but his blood pressure has been dangerous for months, and his doctors are worried about his heart. He doesn't have years to wait around for things to get right between you two." I moved out of the kitchen, away from Zoe. "Diane, I'm sorry to hear that about Dad. I genuinely am." "Are you?" she said. "Because you've been stringing Mom along for 2 months with lunches and polite conversation, and nothing actually changes. We're not stupid, Lauren. We can see what you're doing." "What am I doing?" I asked. "You're stalling," she said. "And meanwhile, your husband is building a company on connections and market access that my father helped create. Not directly, maybe, but the infrastructure, the networks, the state contracts that run through Georgia. Dad was part of building those systems. He deserves some recognition for that." I had to give Diane credit. It was a more aggressive version of the argument than my mother had offered, but it was built on the same false foundation. The idea that proximity to infrastructure, decades old and public, constituted some kind of personal claim. "Diane," I said carefully, "I think you should talk to David Okafor." There was a pause. "Who?" "Our attorney," I said. "He's handling anything that touches on business matters. I'm going to give you his number, and I'd like all future conversations about Marcus's company to go through him." The silence that followed was long enough that I could hear her breathing change. "You have an attorney?" she said. "We've had one for a while," I said. Another pause. Then her voice dropped into something colder and more honest than anything she'd said yet. "Lauren, you don't want to make enemies of this family." "I didn't make any enemies," I said. "I opened my front door." I ended the call. Within 4 hours, I had received 6 messages. 2 from Diane, 2 from my mother, and 2 from my father, the last of whom had apparently overcome his reluctance to contact me when the situation became urgent enough. His messages were not soft. He talked about years of sacrifice, about what family owed to family, about how Marcus had benefited from everything this family built, a claim so vague it embarrassed me on his behalf. He suggested that if we could not come to a reasonable arrangement, he had legal avenues he intended to explore. I forwarded all 6 messages to David Okafor. He called me within the hour. "This is what we were waiting for," he said. "Written threats documented. I want you and Marcus to come in Monday morning." On Monday, we did. David reviewed everything. The recordings, the filings I'd found, the 6 messages, my notes from every interaction since October. He was calm in the way that good attorneys are calm, not because the situation was simple, but because they have mapped it and know exactly where the exits are. He sent a formal letter to my father that afternoon, 2 pages, precise and measured. It identified the legal basis for their claims as non-existent, outlined the recordings and documentation we held, and made clear that any attempt to file a legal action based on implied partnership, unjust enrichment, or informal agreement would be defended in full with costs sought against the claimant. At the bottom, it noted that further contact concerning Carter Logistics Solutions should be directed to his office. My family went silent for 10 days. In those 10 days, I did something I had been putting off for months. I drove to a botanical garden on a Tuesday afternoon, not our wedding venue, a different one, smaller, with a Japanese garden section in the back. And I sat on a bench by the koi pond and I let myself feel the full weight of what the previous 2 months had cost me. Not the legal maneuvering, the grief. The specific grief of recognizing that the family you grew up in is capable of looking at your life, your husband, your child, and calculating only what it's worth to them. I sat there for 2 hours. A few ducks moved across the water. The light changed. I cried once briefly, and then I stopped. I bought myself a cup of tea from the garden cafe and drove home. I was not done, but I had given myself permission to be human about it for an afternoon. That mattered. The silence broke on a Thursday evening, 12 days after the attorney's letter. My mother called at 7 p.m., dinner time calculated, because she had always believed that people were softer after food. Her voice was different this time. The church clothes warmth had been replaced by something more personal, more deliberate. She was crying, not loudly. My mother had never been a loud crier, but steadily in a way that she knew I could hear. "Lauren," she said, "I don't understand how it came to this. I'm your mother. Whatever mistakes were made, and I know mistakes were made, I'm still your mother, and you're still my daughter, and Zoe is my granddaughter." A lawyer's letter. I never thought I'd receive a lawyer's letter from my own child. I sat at the kitchen counter with my tea going cold beside me, and I listened. She talked for nearly 15 minutes. She talked about my childhood, specific memories, chosen carefully, the kind that hit the oldest pressure points. The Christmas she had driven 40 miles to find a particular doll I had wanted. The night she had stayed up with me through a fever in 8th grade. She was not inventing these memories. They were real. That was what made it hard. She made an offer near the end. She said that if I was willing to come to the table without lawyers, my father had agreed to drop any talk of the business entirely, that all they wanted was a relationship, that they would sign something if that's what it took, a statement that they had no claims, no expectations, nothing financial, just family, just access to Zoe. I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "Mom, I appreciate you calling. I'm going to think about what you've said." She exhaled, the release of someone who has been holding their breath. "Lauren." "I'll be in touch," I said. "Good night." I hung up and sat in the silence of my kitchen. Here is what I did not say to her. I had heard the word access and I had heard the word Zoe in the same sentence, and that combination had produced a very specific, very cold clarity in the center of my chest. They had shifted the target from Marcus's company to our daughter. Not overtly, not yet. My mother's framing had been emotional, but I had been listening carefully for 2 months, and I understood by now that when my family was building towards something, they revealed it in the language they chose when they thought you weren't paying attention. I did not panic. That surprised me. The first time I had genuinely surprised myself through this entire ordeal. A year earlier, that call might have unraveled me, but I had spent the last 2 months building something. Knowledge, legal protection, documentation, and, most unexpectedly, a clearer understanding of who I was, separate from who they had always told me I was. I forwarded my mother's voicemail to David Okafor. I typed a brief summary of the conversation. Then I did something I had been avoiding because it felt like asking for help, which had always been difficult for me. I called Janet. Janet Mercer had worked beside me at the marketing firm for 4 years before I left to support Marcus's company full-time. She was 53, twice divorced, the kind of woman who had navigated enough of her own difficult terrain that she gave advice without framing it as advice. We had stayed close. She lived 20 minutes away. She came over the next afternoon. I made actual coffee this time. We sat at my kitchen table. The same table where I had made my lists, where I had spent hours with my laptop tracing public filings, where I had eaten breakfast across from Marcus on the mornings when everything felt manageable and the mornings when it didn't. Janet listened to everything from the beginning, all the way through to my mother's call the previous evening. When I finished, she wrapped her hands around her mug and said, "Lauren, the thing they're counting on is that you still want them to love you the right way. That's the hook they keep reaching for." I thought about that for a long moment. "You think I still want that?" She looked at me steadily. "I think you're human. I think of course you do. I think it's okay to want it and still refuse to let it be used against you." That distinction between wanting something and being controlled by the wanting was more useful to me in that moment than almost anything else I had encountered in the previous months. I wrote it down after she left. I kept it. I also reached out that week to a therapist I had seen briefly years earlier, a woman named Dr. Amara Osei, who worked out of a small practice in Decatur. I made an appointment for the following Monday, not because I was falling apart, because I was not falling apart, and I wanted to understand why, and I wanted to make sure I stayed that way. Dr. Osei said something in our first session that I have never forgotten. She said, "The fact that you built 7 years of life without them, a marriage, a child, a household, an identity, means that your foundation was never dependent on their approval. You think you're surviving this. You're actually just proving something you already built." My family across town had gone quiet again, observing, reassessing. I could feel the pause in their strategy the same way I had felt it in Diane's silence on the phone. They were deciding what to try next. I was ready for it. For the first time since October, I felt not just prepared, I felt settled. They came to the house on a Sunday. No call ahead, no text. Just a knock on the door at 11 in the morning. My father, my mother, and Diane, standing on my porch the same way my mother had stood there in October, except that this time it wasn't just her, and this time my father was in front. Marcus was home. Zoe was in the backyard with her jump rope. I had been reading at the kitchen table, and the knock caught me mid-page in a way that felt, for just a second, like a physical interruption. I went to the door and I opened it. "We need to talk," my father said. He didn't say it aggressively. He said it the way he had always said things, with the flat authority of a man who had spent decades being the person in the room whose statements required no justification. I looked at him, then at my mother, who had her hands clasped in front of her and her eyes slightly too wide, the expression of a woman practicing sincerity. Then at Diane, who was standing slightly behind and to the right and was not performing anything at all. Diane looked like herself, calculating and barely patient with the necessity of performance. "You should have called," I said. "Would you have answered?" my father said. I stepped back. "Come in." Marcus appeared in the hallway behind me. He had heard the voices. He stood with his arms at his sides and his face entirely composed, and he looked at my father with the particular stillness of a man who's been underestimated by this specific person before and is under no illusion that it has stopped. "Douglas," Marcus said. A nod, not warm, not hostile, simply present. My father returned the nod and said nothing. We sat in the living room again, the same formation as October, sofa and armchair, except now Marcus was there, standing near the window with a glass of water, and the room felt different with him in it. My father was the one who spoke first, and to his credit, or perhaps strategically, he spoke plainly. "Lauren, we overstepped. I know we did. The suggestion about the business was, it was poorly timed and poorly framed, and your attorney's letter made clear that it was also legally inappropriate. I'm willing to acknowledge that." I waited. "But I want you to hear me," he continued. "Your mother is not well. She hasn't slept properly in months. This distance from you, from Zoe, it is destroying her. I am asking you, as your father, to find a way past this." My mother, on cue, reached into her purse and produced a folded piece of paper. She held it out to me. "We had our own attorney draft this," she said. "It's a statement, renouncing any financial claim, any business claim, anything, signed by all three of us." I did not reach for the paper. Diane, who had been quiet until now, spoke. Her voice was careful, more careful than it had been on the phone. "Lauren, we know we made mistakes, but you have a daughter who has no relationship with her maternal grandparents. You have a chance to fix that. Not for us, for Zoe." There it was, clearer than my mother's voicemail. For Zoe. I looked at Diane. I thought about what Janet had said, the hook they keep reaching for. I thought about Dr. Osei's voice saying, "Your foundation was never dependent on their approval." I thought about the letter David Okafor had sent, and the 6 voicemails I had forwarded, and the voice memo I had made in a restaurant in Marietta over a Caesar salad. And I thought about Zoe in the backyard with her jump rope, her dark brown skin in the late November light, her laugh that sounded exactly like Marcus's when something genuinely delighted her, her complete and uncomplicated belonging in the life we had built for her. "I appreciate the statement," I said. "I'll have David Okafor review it." My father's jaw tightened. "Lauren, I'm asking you to put down the lawyers and have a conversation with your family." "I am having a conversation with my family," I said. I looked at Marcus briefly. He did not move. Marcus is my family. Zoe is my family. And right now, I am choosing to keep the conversation within the structures that protect that family. Diane lost her patience first, which was exactly what I had expected. "What are you protecting them from?" she said. "From us? From people who love you? From people who showed up to my home unannounced," I said, keeping my voice level, 2 months after a 7-year silence that coincided exactly with my husband's company being valued in a business journal your grandfather subscribed to for 30 years. The room went quiet. My father stood up. He was not theatrical about it, but there was something in the movement that was meant to communicate authority. He was still, at 71, a large man. "You've made your position clear," he said. "I have," I agreed. They left. My mother paused at the door. One more pause, one more carefully held look, and I thought for a moment she was going to say something real, something without a strategy in it. But she didn't. She put her sunglasses on and walked to the car. I closed the door and leaned against it. My hands were shaking slightly, not with fear exactly, something adjacent to it, the body's response to sustained vigilance, to holding a position under pressure. I let myself feel it. I didn't push it away, but underneath the shaking was something steadier and more durable, because I knew, standing against that door, that I had held 3 of them, all at once, with everything they had decided to bring: grief, guilt, Zoe's name, a signed document, my father's physical presence, my mother's sleepless nights, all of it. And I had held. That didn't make me invincible. It made me sure. I walked into the kitchen where Marcus was already making coffee. He handed me a mug. He looked at me for a moment. "You okay?" he asked. "Better than okay," I said. "I think they just gave me their last move." He raised an eyebrow. "They've run out of leverage," I said, "so they tried sentiment. When sentiment fails, what's left?" He thought about it. "Nothing," he said. "Nothing they're willing to do legally." "Right," I said, "which means the next step is ours." David Okafor had been advising us to wait for them to make a provable move. We didn't have to wait much longer. 10 days after the Sunday visit, my father did something that surprised even me, not in its ambition, but in its transparency. He contacted the business journalist who had written the original article about Carter Logistics Solutions and suggested, in an email, traceable, permanent, that the reporter might want to investigate the founding story of the company, implying there were silent contributors whose involvement had never been publicly acknowledged. He framed it as a tip from someone with direct family knowledge. The journalist, to his credit, forwarded the email to Marcus with a note that said he had no interest in pursuing it, but thought we should know. I read that email 3 times. Then I sat back in my chair and felt something I hadn't expected. Clarity. Not anger, not triumph. Clarity. The kind that comes when a shape you've been half seeing finally comes into full focus. My father had put it in writing. Voluntarily. Unprompted. The very thing David Okafor had told us to wait for. We met with David that afternoon. He reviewed the email with the quiet satisfaction of someone who sees the final piece slide into place. "This," he said, "changes the nature of what we can do." He explained, "My father's email to the journalist constituted attempted reputational harm, potentially tortious interference, and was consistent with a pattern of conduct that could support a restraining order limiting contact with both the business and our family. We now had grounds to act, not just defend, but move. We chose the setting deliberately. David suggested a formal meeting, not in court, not yet, but in his conference room, and he sent a letter to my father's attorney. Yes, they had retained one by this point, requesting a meeting within the week to discuss a resolution to the ongoing dispute before further legal escalation. They came. My father arrived with his attorney, a man named Briggs, older, the kind of lawyer who had clearly handled a lot of small civil matters and was beginning to understand this was not one. Diane came with them, uninvited but apparently unable to stay away. My mother did not come, which told me she had been advised not to, or had decided she could not hold her composure, or both. Marcus and I sat across the conference table from them, with David Okafor at my left. I had worn a gray blazer, simple jewelry, no Chanel No. 5. I had thought about what I wanted to communicate with my presence in that room, not anger, not triumph, not grief, and I had settled on something I could only describe as completion. I was there to close something, cleanly. David laid out the documentation on the table, methodical, the voice recordings, my mother's lunch conversation, my father's 6 voicemails, the threatening text from Diane, the public civil filings from my father's professional history, and last, the email my father had sent to the journalist, which David had printed on a single sheet and placed at the top of the pile, facing my father. My father looked at it. He looked at it for a long time. Briggs leaned over and read it. Then he sat up very straight and said something quietly to my father that I couldn't hear. My father said, "That was a private communication. It was intended to—" "It was sent to a journalist," David said very calmly. "It was intended to be published." Diane looked at the table. She was not someone who flushed easily, but something moved through her face that I hadn't seen there before. I think it was the specific humiliation of having been very confident and being proven wrong. My father tried another angle. He began to talk about the spirit of the gesture, that he had simply wanted credit to go where credit was due, that he had no intention of harming Marcus's company, that this had all become far more adversarial than he had intended. "Douglas," I said. He stopped and looked at me. I had not called him by his first name in my entire life, and the effect of it was immediate and complete. A small surgical correction of the power dynamic that had existed between us since I was born. "You attended no event in my marriage," I said. "You met Zoe when she was 6 years old in this building, because I let you into my life after you appeared on my doorstep in response to a financial publication. You have spent the last 2 months attempting to obtain a piece of my husband's company through emotional pressure, implied legal threats, and now documented reputational interference. And you have done all of this while telling me that what you want is a relationship." I let that sit. My father opened his mouth. "I'm not finished," I said. He closed it. "I have every communication documented. My attorney holds copies of everything. If you file any claim, send any further communication to any journalist, or attempt to make contact with Zoe outside of what we formally agree to, if we agree to anything, we will pursue every legal avenue available to us, and we will do it completely." I paused. "I'm not interested in punishing you. I'm interested in protecting my family. But you should understand clearly that those two things are no longer mutually exclusive." The silence in the conference room was the particular silence of people who have finally understood that they have misjudged the situation entirely. Briggs spoke first, in the measured tone of an attorney cutting his client's losses. He suggested that all parties take a few days before any decisions were made. My father did not speak again for the rest of the meeting. He sat in his chair and looked at the table, and he looked, for the first time in my memory, like a man who had run out of room. Diane looked at me as they were leaving. One long, unreadable look. I met it and held it, and she was the one who turned away first. In the hallway after they were gone, David Okafor allowed himself one small, professionally restrained smile. "That," he said, "was very well done." Marcus put his arm around my shoulders in the elevator on the way down. I didn't cry until we were in the parking garage, briefly, with his hand on my back. Not from grief this time, from something that was the complete opposite of grief. Something that didn't have an easy name but felt like land underfoot after a very long time treading water. The weeks that followed were the quietest of the preceding 6 months and the most decisive. Briggs contacted David Okafor 4 days after the conference room meeting. His clients were prepared to sign a comprehensive legal agreement that went significantly further than the informal statement my mother had offered on my doorstep. It formalized the permanent renunciation of any financial claim against Marcus and his company, prohibited contact with any journalist or business associate of Carter Logistics Solutions, included a non-disparagement clause, and required them to cover a portion of our legal fees. In exchange, they got nothing. No guaranteed access to Zoe, no dinners, no holidays. The question of whether my daughter would ever have a relationship with my parents would be answered on her terms and mine, not as a concession negotiated under legal duress. My father signed on a Tuesday morning in December. I was in Zoe's school auditorium when David sent me the photo. The winter concert, Zoe, in a silver headband playing the triangle with absolute seriousness. I looked at the signature page, then put my phone away and watched my daughter. My mother attempted to send Zoe a Christmas card through Diane, a workaround designed to test the agreement. David sent a quiet reminder to Briggs. It was the last attempted contact for the remainder of the year. I wrote my parents a letter. Clear, not angry, not forgiving in the sense of absolution. I told them Zoe knew she had maternal grandparents and that I had not spoken ill of them to her. I told them the possibility of a relationship remained open, but it would need to be earned, slowly, with no guarantees. Marcus read the draft. He said, "This is the most dignified thing I've ever seen." I told him his opinion was heavily biased. He said that was almost certainly true. We ordered dinner that night from the Thai restaurant Zoe had decided was her favorite. She ate pad see ew with the focused pleasure of a child who has found something good. I watched her and thought, she will never remember this year. She will grow up knowing she was loved. And if she eventually knows the rest of the story, she will know it as something that happened before she was old enough to be asked to carry it. That was the truest victory. Not the signed agreement, not the conference room. That dinner, pad CUW, silver headband, a Wednesday in February, that was what it had all been for. Spring came early that year in Atlanta. The dogwoods along our street opened over the course of a single warm week. I started taking walks in the morning again. Zoe rode her bike beside me on Saturdays. Marcus made coffee earlier than he needed to just to have it ready when I came home. Life, which had held its breath for 6 months, began to breathe again. Carter Logistics Solutions continued to grow, steadily in the way of a company built on actual competence. Marcus hired a COO, promoted 2 longtime employees, and opened a satellite office in Charlotte. The $55 million valuation became a floor, not a ceiling. We bought a new house that summer, a proper home office for him, a studio for the painting I had started in the fall and never stopped, a bigger yard for Zoe and the rescue dog she had lobbied for since January. His name was Biscuit. He was unremarkable in every way except that he was hers, and that made him extraordinary. Renata came for a long visit in July. She and Zoe spent 3 mornings making a recipe book. Renata's mother's recipes in slanted cursive, Zoe illustrating each page with colored pencil drawings that were enthusiastic and anatomically approximate. The book lives on our kitchen shelf now, and Zoe explains the provenance of every recipe with the authority of someone who was personally present at their creation. But here is what happened to my family, because honesty requires it. My father's health declined persistently. He had a minor cardiac event in April. He retired from the last consulting work he had been doing, and the structure that had organized his days for 40 years was gone. My mother's catering business lost its last 2 regular clients and quietly closed. Diane's marriage, which had been in trouble longer than anyone acknowledged, ended in divorce proceedings that were, by all accounts, not gentle. She had built her identity on the conviction that she had made the right choices, the right values, the right family, and losing that framework left her genuinely unmoored. I did not reach out to Diane. I held the thought for a few days, then set it down. She knew where I was. If she wanted to begin something different, she was capable of beginning it. That wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. In October, it's exactly 1 year after my mother had first appeared at my door, a simple grocery store card arrived in the mail, flowers on the front. Inside, in her handwriting, Lauren. We are trying to understand. We are trying to do better. We love you and we love Zoe. That is all this says. Mom. No requests, no leverage, no strategy I could detect, though I read it several times looking. I put it on the shelf in my studio beside the painting I had finished in the spring, a loose rendering of the botanical garden where I had sat by the koi pond on that Tuesday afternoon, the one I had given myself permission to be human. The light in the painting is late afternoon light, the color of something ending and something else beginning at the same time. I haven't decided yet what comes next with my mother. That decision will come slowly, on Zoe's timeline as much as my own, with my eyes open. But I live in a house with good light and a dog named Biscuit, and a man who has coffee ready when I come home from my walk, and a daughter who knows every recipe in a handwritten book on the kitchen shelf. That is enough. It is more than enough. It is everything. What would you have done? Would you have opened the door? If this story reached you, if it found you at the right moment, leave a comment. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. That means more than you know.